Occasionally in Yu-Gi-Oh, they'll release a card which allows you to special summon monsters from the deck, but there's never really been a good list of which are the absolute best monsters to special summon from the deck, that can be special summoned from the deck, and are not specifically tied to an archetype, and just have good effects on the field. So at number 10, we have Pandemic Dragon. This card has the effect where once per turn, you can destroy one monster on the field with an attack equal to or less than this card's attack. And since this card has 2500 attack, it has a wide range of cards it can actually destroy pretty easily. And to add to that, it has another effect where once per turn, you can pay as many life points as you want to reduce the attack of all other monsters on the field, permanently by the amount of life points you paid, in multiples of 100. So you can just force other monsters in the field to have a lower attack power value than this card, and then destroy whichever monster you want. And then all of those monsters will stay at that lower attack power value. So if you wanted to, you could just reduce the attack of all of your opponent's monsters to 0, and then just attack over all of them for game. And on top of these two good effects, it has a floating effect, that if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, all face-up monsters in the field lose 1000 attack permanently. Now, this isn't the best floating effect in the world, but all monsters on the field losing 1000 attack is not half bad anyway, especially since this card is good enough on the field where your opponent would try to get rid of it as soon as possible. And at number 9, we have Mist Valley Apex Avian. This card has the effect on the field where once per turn, if a card effect is activated, you can return a Mist Valley card you control to your hand in order to negate that effect and destroy the card. And since this card itself is a Mist Valley card, it can just return itself to your hand in order to activate its universal negate. So, if you had the potential to special summon any one monster from your deck, having a high attack monster who can negate one of anything is not a half bad choice. Although, assuming those situations, and that you're playing this in a non-Mist Valley deck, it's basically returning itself to your hand in order to activate its negate, in which case you lose a monster on the board. However, since this card just returns itself to your hand in order to activate its effect, instead of going to the graveyard, you can then use this card in the hand as a resource, if you don't plan on bringing it out later in the duel, as a discard choice for a Nightmare Link monster or Twin Twisters, or just another card in the hand to be discarded randomly for a danger effect. So basically, it gets to be useful in the field, and then it can be used as a cost in your hand, to use other common effects, which I think makes it pretty good. A decent solid option to be special summoned, especially if you play a Pendulum deck that can special summon it easily from the hand. But it's not as good as maybe some of the other cards on this list. And at number 8, we have Dino Wrestler Pankratops. Now, this is a 2600 attack beat stick who has a spell speed 2. Whenever you want, just tribute this card to destroy one card your opponent controls. Now, having spell speed 2 destruction during your opponent's turn is a really good effect, an effect some of the best cards in the game's history have had. But this card has to tribute itself in order to use its effect, if you're playing it outside of a Dino Wrestler deck, which we are assuming is the case in this video, as these are cards that are being played outside their archetypes. Although what makes this card a little bit better than Avian, who has a little bit higher attack power value and a slightly better effect with its universal negate, is that Pankratops can also very easily special summon itself from your hand, which just makes it a better all-around card, and a reason why this card sees a lot of play in competitive decks. And even though the theme of this list is cards with good effects on the field, assuming they could be special summoned from the deck, I still have to take into account the versatility of this card's special summoning requirements, while also acknowledging that its effects on the field, as well as its stats, are really good as well. And it's no wonder why this card is one of the most played staple monsters in the game right now. And at number 7, we have Dark Magician of Chaos. During the end phase of the turn in which this card was summoned, you get to add one spell card from your graveyard to your hand. And that kind of recoverability is one of the best types of graveyard recovery you can accomplish, as recovering spells from the graveyard has way more restrictions to it than monsters or trap cards, because spells are just a little bit more stronger on average, especially recovering something that's limited and normally would have only been used once per duel. And this card allows you to do it as long as this card was summoned that turn. And it used to be immediately, but this card got an errata because its old effect was too powerful, and it's a little bit more balanced if you only get to add the card during your end phase, instead of as soon as this card is brought out. Alternatively, while it's on the field, it banishes any monster it destroys by battle. which allows you to bypass a lot of floating effects. And since most meta decks float on destruction, that's actually a pretty good effect to have. And there's even 2 archetype specific cards that can special summon this card from the deck. So this card was kind of made to be special summoned from the deck, which is probably why it makes this list. And at number 6, we have Pot of the Forbidden. This is a flip effect monster that when it's flipped face up, you get to choose one of 4 effects. Either draw 2 cards, return all spell and trap cards in the field to the hand, destroy all of your opponent's monsters, or look at your opponent's hand and then shuffle 1 card from their hand back into the deck. All 4 of these effects are good, so you basically choose whichever of these effects you want depending on the situation of the field at the time. And if you don't really need to destroy anything or deny your opponent of resources, you could always just draw 2 cards, which in itself is a good effect. And since it's a flip effect monster, it actually has flip effect monster support, and can be special summoned directly from the deck with a few cards. Now, while none of the cards which can special summon it directly from the deck seem to be specifically designed for this card, it definitely works very well in those kinds of decks because of how good all of its effects are. And its biggest limiting factor is the fact that it's a high-level monster, which would require 2 tributes for its tribute set, and is a perfect example of the kinds of cards that I'm looking for in a list like this one. And at number 5, we have Kozmo Dark Destroyer. When this card is summoned, you can destroy 1 monster on the field. And also, while it's on the field, it cannot be targeted by your opponent's card effects. So a 3000 attack beater, being able to destroy 1 card once it comes on the field, as well as having protection on the field, that's a really good card to have, which is why this card was limited on the ban list for a while, because it was a little too good in Kozmo decks, because it also has an effect where if it's destroyed on the field, you can banish this card from the graveyard in order to special summon a level 7 or lower Kozmo monster from your deck, which is a really good floating effect attached to a card which already had good on-field effects as well. Of course, since this list only takes into account non-archetype specific effects, I didn't really include its good floating effect when adding this card to the list. The fact that it gets to destroy something as soon as it's brought out and is untargetable while having a high attack stat is why this card makes this list at such a high spot, as those are just pretty good things to have on their own. And at number 4, we have God Phoenix Gearfried. When this card declares an attack, you can equip 1 face-up monster on the field to this card as an equip card. So you can attack into one of your opponent's monsters and then equip a different one of your opponent's monster to this card, and then just continue the attack like normal. And also, the monster it equips to itself by this effect gains the effect to increase this card's attack by 500. And it has another effect on the field, where if a monster effect is activated, you can send 1 equip card you control to the graveyard to negate the activation and destroy that card. So at 3000 attack baseline, this card can absorb one of your opponent's monsters, boost itself to 3500 attack, and also have 1 monster effect negate per turn. On top of the fact that this card has an alternative special summoning condition, where you can bring it out from your hand by just banishing an equipped spell from your field or graveyard. So this card just has great effects on the field, and makes this an excellent card to special summon from your deck, if you just want a strong monster in the field that can really pressure your opponent. And at number 3, we have Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. Whenever there's a card that can special summon dragon-type monsters from your deck, they usually choose this card as their target, because it's just so good in dragon-type decks. Basically, once per turn, you can special summon a dragon-type monster from your hand or graveyard, with no restrictions to that summon other than you can't summon another copy of this card. Because usually, when cards can special summon something from the graveyard, they either lock you out of summoning other cards for the turn, or negate the effects of monsters on the field. And Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon does neither of those things. In fact, it has alternative special summoning requirement, where you can banish 1 face-up dragon you control in order to special summon this card from your hand, making it even easier to bring out than normal. And on top of all that, it has good stats at 2800 attack. There's a reason this card is limited in the TCG and banned in the OCG, because it's just too good of a card, with not enough restrictions placed on it, and if something can special summon it from the deck, this card is even better. Although it's not generic enough to take the top spot on this list, but this is basically the best card to bring out from the deck if you're playing a deck that has any kinds of dragons in it. And at number 2, we have Amorphage Goliath. While this card is on the field, neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck. So it's like a permanent effect of Artifact Scythe, a card which sees competitive play and only locks your opponent out of their extra deck for 1 turn. Although the big difference between the two is that Scythe is much easier to special summon and only locks out your opponent, whereas Goliath locks you out of the extra deck as well. And with its high stat value of 2750, it's kind of difficult to beat over without being able to special summon from your extra deck. So if you just want to lock down your opponent, this card is a really good way to do it. It also has a pendulum effect that really requires you to play an Amorphage deck for it to work, where it becomes basically a macro Kozmo as long as you have an Amorphage monster on the field and this card in the pendulum zone. And since it's a pendulum monster, it goes to your extra deck when it's destroyed, which means you can bring it out later through a pendulum summon. But again, that's not really why this card is on the list. It's really just here because of that pretty good lockdown effect, and you can just straight up win against some opponents if you just get this card on the field, because they wouldn't have any way to get rid of this monster without going into their extra deck. And at number 1, we have ARCHLORD Kristya. While this card is on the field, neither player can special summon monsters, and at 2800 attack, it's the strongest main deck monster with this kind of effect. And because ARCHLORD Kristya exists, there's no real reason to use Amorphage Goliath, since Kristya just has a better effect. Usually, if you can special summon any monster from your deck, ARCHLORD Kristya is the best monster to choose most of the time, because locking out all special summons from your opponent is better than just locking out extra deck plays. Because if they can special summon, that means there's a chance they can bring out cards like Dino Wrestler Pankratops or Eater of Millions, both of which easily remove Goliath from the field, whereas ARCHLORD Kristya shuts those two down. Now, there's other monsters which prevent special summons that are also main deck monsters, but what ARCHLORD Kristya has over them is that it can be special summoned, whereas most of those other ones cannot be special summoned at all, or have such low stats that they wouldn't survive very long anyway. In fact, another card that can be special summoned and also locks out special summons, called Jojin the Spiritualist, has seen tons of play over the course of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, even though it only has 200 attack, because of just how good the effect is to lock out players from special summoning. So with ARCHLORD Kristya both having the highest attack of all the main deck monsters that lock out special summoning, and also having no restrictions on its special summon, in fact it has an effect that lets it special summon itself from your hand if you control exactly 4 fairy type monsters in your graveyard. And that just makes this the best high level monster to special summon from your deck, assuming generic cases and you're not playing an archetype with better archetype support monsters. Alright, and that's the end of the list. Now, I know this one is kinda specific, but I like these gimmicky specific lists, and I hope you found it somewhat entertaining as well. As always, if you think there's monsters that I missed that should have made the list, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also, don't forget to subscribe for weekly videos just like this one.